Francis Ngannou just crossed a line no other fighter had the courage to cross. He's taking the UFC to court, demanding a staggering $50 million in damages. In an unprecedented move, he's pulling back the curtain on the organization's best-kept secrets, confidential fighter agreements, millions of dollars that seem to have vanished, and a trail of leaked emails so damaging they could destroy reputations for good. But the real turning point, the discovery that pushed him over the edge, was hidden deep within the fine print of his own contract. A single, devastating clause that served as undeniable proof the UFC had been deceiving him from the very beginning. So what's really in those documents? Let's dive deep into the lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the entire world of mixed martial arts. The foundation of the UFC is cracking. From the sand mines of Cameroon to the glitz of Las Vegas, Francis Ngannou's journey has been legendary. Now, the former UFC heavyweight champion is launching a legal war, filing a massive $50 million lawsuit against the UFC and its parent company, TKO Holdings. His accusation is clear. He claims the UFC built its empire on his back, only to systematically underpay him and silence his voice when he dared to speak out about unfair fighter pay and restrictive sponsorship rights. As Ngannou himself puts it, they create an illusion of negotiation where none truly exists. This isn't just another public feud with Dana White. This is the most significant financial clash in UFC history, one that threatens to tear the lid off every dirty secret the promotion has ever tried to bury. According to exclusive ESPN reports from Mark Raimondi, the lawsuit unveils a staggering pattern of withheld earnings. Ngannou alleges the UFC systematically failed to pay him millions in bonuses, sponsor royalties, and his fair share of pay-per-view revenue from his 2021 to 2022 bouts. The core of his claim is a bombshell figure. He believes he was paid less than 20% of the revenue he personally generated for the promotion. And this goes far beyond simple contract disputes. The filings cite internal UFC communications that reveal a deliberate strategy, structuring contracts to lock champions into long-term exclusivity. Ngannou himself has famously labeled this system modern-day slavery in designer clothes. The legal claims are threefold: breach of contract, exploitation of his likeness, and intentionally blocking outside sponsorship deals. The lawsuit points to the UFC's exclusive partnership with Crypto.com as a prime example, alleging it directly cost Ngannou a personal sponsorship worth a staggering $1.2 million. A deal that was cancelled virtually overnight. Imagine dedicating your life to becoming a world champion, only to have a seven-figure sponsorship torn up because your employer controls every logo you wear. This is the core of Ngannou's battle, a fight for basic autonomy in a league that labels its stars independent contractors, while treating them as owned assets. But the most damning allegation, the one shaking the MMA world to its core, lies within private text messages filed in Nevada Superior Court. UFC executives allegedly referred to Ngannou as a risky investment we need to devalue before he gets ideas. If verified, this would be a smoking gun, confirming the UFC actively works to suppress a fighter's market value to keep its payrolls artificially low and its profits immense. And those profits are staggering. During Ngannou's championship reign, the UFC cleared over $1 billion in annual revenue, while fighter pay remained a paltry 16%, less than half of the revenue share in other major sports. The lawsuit depicts a man cornered not by an opponent in the octagon, but by a billion-dollar system built on leveraging desperation. As Francis himself once explained, "You're kind of broke, you're struggling, and then they offer you $100,000. It's hard to turn that down when you know you're worth 10 times more." This is the story of that man finally turning it down. This lawsuit transcends a single fighter's grievance. It's an indictment of an entire system engineered to keep athletes financially dependent and compliant. Francis Ngannou describes it as a corporate chokehold, where every contract clause, discretionary bonus, and last-minute renewal is a tool of control. The confrontation became deeply personal when Dana White, the UFC frontman now named directly in the suit, responded in his characteristic style. Dismissing Ngannou's landmark PFL deal as nonsense, White publicly mocked the former champion for taking zero risks. However, Ngannou's legal team has weaponized those very words. The 98-page filing alleges that White's comments, labeling the PFL contract stupid, and implying Francis was avoiding a fight with John Jones, were not mere opinion, but a calculated defamation campaign designed to sabotage his marketability after leaving the UFC. The suit claims this direct retaliation cost Ngannou over $3 million in boxing sponsorships, with one deal collapsing immediately after White's public criticism. But the retaliation wasn't just verbal. The moment Ngannou walked away, the UFC began to erase him. He was conspicuously scrubbed from promotional reels, highlight packages, and even the 100 greatest knockouts list. A stunning attempt to airbrush history for a man once hailed as the most dangerous puncher in the world. This, perhaps, is why this lawsuit resonates so deeply. It's not merely about lost money, but about stolen legacy and a fundamental lack of respect. The case suggests this was all by design. Insiders report that Ngannou's legal team possesses emails from as early as 2020, in which UFC executives explicitly discuss strategies to contain his growing influence and prevent any single athlete from becoming bigger than the brand itself. This playbook will sound familiar to wrestling fans. It mirrors the tactics of entertainment empires like WWE, which famously classifies its performers as independent contractors, while tightly controlling their likeness and merchandise. A source close to Ngannou's camp drew a chilling parallel. The UFC runs like Vince McMahon's empire. They let you think you're free, until you realize every decision still goes through the same office. The ultimate irony? Dana White has always openly admitted that he learned from the best. Vince McMahon himself. Just like his mentor Vince McMahon, Dana White built an empire by mastering one thing: controlling the narrative. So when Francis Ngannou defied that system, when he walked away from a UFC heavyweight title to pursue boxing and earned a life-changing $20 million in a single night, it wasn't just seen as rebellion. In the eyes of the UFC, it was an act of betrayal. Now, his legal team is presenting what they call brand extermination tactics. They allege the UFC systematically suppressed Ngannou's media visibility, blocked his sponsors from televised events, and even blacklisted journalists who reported sympathetically on his cause. But the lawsuit itself wasn't the biggest shock. It was the evidence that came with it. A flood of receipts, screenshots, internal emails, text messages, and NDAs, hinting that multiple other fighters, including at least one other former champion, are preparing to join Ngannou's class action filing. The moment this news broke, social media ignited. Hashtags like #FighterJustice and #FreeNgannou started trending worldwide. And Dana White's response? Unprecedented silence. Not a tweet, not a post, not a single press statement. For now. But the lawsuit goes far beyond Dana White. It targets the entire ecosystem. Parent company TKO Holdings, Endeavor, and even broadcast partners who allegedly benefited from exploitative labor practices disguised as standard contracts. The real seismic revelation, however, is what insiders are calling the contract manipulation playbook. This leaked internal document, filed as Exhibit 14, allegedly details how the promotion uses rolling renewal clauses. These clauses automatically extend a fighter's deal every time they accept a bonus, a sponsorship adjustment, or even agree to a rescheduled bout. It's the very mechanism Ngannou once described as an inescapable loop, trapping fighters in a system designed for control. His legal team argues this mechanism created a system of perpetual bondage, locking fighters into deals long after their official terms should have ended. In simple terms, if you blinked, you re-signed. It's a business tactic that seems unbelievable, until you see the numbers. The UFC reportedly operates with EBITDA margins as high as 48%, one of the most profitable models in all of professional sports. Yet, the athletes collectively receive less than 18% of total revenue. To put that in perspective, NFL players get nearly 50%. Top boxers can earn over 60% of an event's revenue. Many UFC fighters, meanwhile, sometimes walk away with barely enough to cover training camp costs and taxes. So when Francis claims the promotion can afford to pay more, he isn't speculating. He's quoting their own financial ledgers. When Ngannou left in early 2023, Dana White publicly mocked his decision. But behind that bravado was panic. Internal sources revealed that Ngannou's departure cost the UFC millions during African broadcast rights negotiations. The promotion's grand plan for UFC Africa, a project Dana had personally championed and banked on the star power of Ngannou, Adesanya, and Usman, collapsed. Investors pulled out. This wasn't just a missed fight. It was the failure of a continent-wide expansion. The lawsuit alleges the UFC's retaliation was swift and systematic. Within 60 days of his exit, Francis was digitally erased. He was cut from promotional reels, excluded from the top 10 knockouts montage, and most damningly, had his likeness payments frozen. Court documents cite internal emails from late 2023 where executives instructed marketing teams to phase out Ngannou assets pending audit. Corporate code for erase him quietly. That was the breaking point. Francis went nuclear. He signed with the PFL, securing an equity stake and becoming the face of their African expansion. Dana's public reaction was a mix of disbelief and insult. But what he left out was the historic deal Ngannou actually secured. An $8 million guarantee for his debut, $12 million for his next fight, plus $2 million for his opponent. Then came the counterpunch. The numbers. Reports indicated Ngannou's PFL debut sold a modest 10,000 pay-per-views. On paper, a commercial failure. But Ngannou's team claims the UFC weaponized this data, strategically leaking it to the media to discredit him just before his lawsuit was filed. The strategy worked. MMA pundits declared it proof that Francis needed the UFC more than it needed him. Dana White publicly laughed, calling the PFL a money pit. Privately, however, a more sinister plot was unfolding. Leaked emails revealed that TKO executives had pressured ESPN to drastically reduce its coverage of the PFL. This is where the story shifts from fierce competition to outright sabotage. The lawsuit now alleges the UFC used its exclusive partnerships with broadcast giants like ESPN and BT Sport not just to promote its own product, but to actively suppress the visibility of rivals, especially those featuring its former champions. In essence, the lawsuit claims a simple, devastating reality. If you leave the UFC, your career doesn't just fade, it's systematically erased. Not because fans lose interest, but because you're made invisible. Francis Ngannou's attorneys label this a monopolistic chokehold, disguised as standard brand protection. To prove it, they've submitted sworn statements from two anonymous ESPN staffers who claim they were directly instructed not to feature PFL content unless it was framed as a negative comparison to the UFC. One staffer confessed, "We had to pretend he didn't exist. This is media erasure, weaponized." The suppression extended beyond broadcast partners. The lawsuit alleges that Ngannou's personal sponsors were pressured to drop him. One athletic apparel company received a friendly reminder from a UFC marketing director, warning that advertising conflicts could jeopardize their future access to UFC fighters. The translation was clear: support Francis, and lose your UFC privileges. That unnamed company pulled out within 48 hours, contributing to over $5 million in lost sponsorships for Ngannou in just 3 months. Yet, the most threatening aspect for the UFC isn't the financial claims. It's the witnesses. Among those reportedly subpoenaed are former champions who have supported Ngannou's stance, including Aljamain Sterling, Demetrius Johnson, and the outspoken Nate Diaz. But the most damning testimony may come from insiders. A former UFC accountant is allegedly prepared to testify that the company used creative accounting, reclassifying revenue and inflating costs, to artificially shrink the revenue pool from which fighter pay is calculated. It's corporate alchemy, turning profits into paperwork. Even more explosive is a rumored statement from a former Zuffa lawyer who allegedly called UFC athlete contracts the most restrictive in modern sports. These testimonies could blow the doors off the entire MMA business model. If Ngannou wins, or even secures a favorable settlement, it won't just cost the UFC $50 million. It could open the floodgates, allowing hundreds of former fighters, from Tyron Woodley to Tony Ferguson, to sue for millions in back pay. The entire financial structure of the promotion could collapse. Through it all, Dana White remains defiant. In a recent post-fight interview, he brushed off the lawsuit, stating, "This is a tough business. You gotta be a real fighter to make it here." That line, intended as praise for his roster, is now being replayed across social media with brutal irony. The sentiment is clear. How great can the sport be if you have to sue the company running it just to get what you're worth? The situation is a public relations nightmare. In the immediate aftermath of the lawsuit, the stock price for UFC's parent company, TKO Holdings, plummeted nearly 9% in a single day, erasing a staggering $1.2 billion in market value. The corporate response was swift. Reports indicate a top-tier crisis PR firm was hired within 48 hours to staunch the bleeding. But Francis Ngannou's legal team is holding firm. His attorney, Samuel Parker, stated publicly, "This case isn't about one contract. It's about decades of systemic underpayment. It's about so-called independent contractors being treated as corporate property." The UFC built its empire on an illusion of freedom, and that illusion is now shattered. For Ngannou, however, the battle is being fought on two fronts: in the courtroom and in the court of public opinion. And currently, he is winning the latter. Clips of him calmly and logically dismantling the UFC's business model on popular podcasts have gone viral. He isn't emotional or ranting. He is simply, and convincingly, stating the facts. This has led fans to a powerful realization. The very organization that once crowned him the baddest man on the planet now labels him as delusional for wanting fair compensation. As one journalist powerfully noted, Ngannou didn't leave the UFC, he escaped it. That sentiment has become the rallying cry for his entire movement. Of course, his path hasn't been without setbacks. The low buy rate for his PFL debut was real, and his boxing ambition suffered a setback with the loss to Anthony Joshua, a defeat he openly acknowledged. Yet, financially, his gamble has paid off monumentally. Reports from Fight Society detail that he has earned nearly $40 million in just over a year since leaving. Compare that to his final UFC purse of roughly $600,000. When he says the system is broken, he isn't speculating. He's presenting a before and after case study with his own bank statement. This is why the public is rallying to his cause. In a sport defined by physical combat, Francis Ngannou is now fighting the one opponent you can't knock out: the system itself. Inside the UFC's Las Vegas headquarters, the atmosphere has shifted from swagger to pure panic. For years, Dana White and his empire treated criticism as mere background noise. But Francis Ngannou's $50 million lawsuit isn't noise. It's a detonation, and the shockwaves are being felt in every boardroom of TKO Holdings. Leaked internal memos reveal that Endeavor's legal team immediately issued a strict media containment directive, ordering senior executives, including the notoriously outspoken Dana White, to limit all unsanctioned public comments. The era of unchecked bravado is, for now, officially on pause. But the damage was already done. Francis didn't just accuse the UFC of underpaying him. He exposed the very gears of the machine, and now those gears are grinding against each other. The core of Ngannou's legal argument is devastating in its simplicity. He asserts the UFC intentionally manipulated fighter contracts to suppress pay, delay free agency, and control sponsorships, creating what his legal team calls a commercial monopoly disguised as competition. And the evidence, they claim, is damning. Internal emails attached to the lawsuit show UFC executives explicitly discussing how to delay renegotiations until a fighter's market value drops. One email, sent directly to Dana White and matchmaker Hunter Campbell, states, "We can't match PFL or Saudi offers, but if we delay until his market cools, we can re-sign him for less." That single sentence could become the most expensive email in sports history. If a court rules this proves intentional wage suppression, the UFC's entire independent contractor model could collapse overnight. Ngannou's attorneys argue this wasn't an isolated incident, but a deliberate, system-wide policy. Fighters weren't offered extensions at their peak. They were strategically frozen out. By the time the UFC returned to the negotiating table, their leverage had evaporated. As one former accountant, now a cooperating witness, testified, the company profited most from the fighters who spoke the least. The lawsuit also details the infamous rolling renewal clauses that automatically reset a contract term every time a fighter accepted a bonus or a bout was rescheduled. The company called this standard business. Ngannou called it slavery with paperwork. When these filings went public, the fallout was immediate. TKO Holdings stock plummeted nearly 9%. Analysts pointed to legal risk. Fans called it karma. Within hours, hashtags like #FreeTheFighters were trending globally. For the first time in decades, public sentiment had decisively turned against Dana White. Fighters who had long remained silent began to speak out. Nate Diaz posted a simple, powerful tweet. "He ain't lying." Jorge Masvidal added, "They talk loyalty until you ask for your worth." The silence had been broken. The momentum was shifting. When legends like Georges St-Pierre and Demetrius Johnson publicly endorsed Ngannou's claims, it was no longer just a rebellion, it was a full-scale reckoning. Behind the scenes, the situation grew even more dire for the UFC. Multiple fighters, including former champions and ranked contenders, reportedly reached out to Ngannou's legal team, ready to join a potential class action lawsuit. In a desperate counter-move, the UFC's lawyers allegedly began offering swift, improved contracts to these very fighters, a transparent attempt to buy their silence before they could become plaintiffs. But as one fighter revealed in leaked texts, they can't buy loyalty forever. This house of cards is falling. Then came the knockout blow. A whistleblowing former UFC accountant provided detailed spreadsheets showing how revenue was reclassified to minimize the fighter's share. The data was staggering. From 2019 to 2023, UFC athletes received less than 18% of total revenue, a pittance compared to the 48% in the NFL or over 60% in boxing, while executives pocketed record bonuses. This long-rumored disparity was now official court evidence. The news sent shockwaves to the very top. Endeavor CEO Ari Emanuel was reportedly furious. The threat wasn't just about the UFC. As Bloomberg reported, if a court ruled UFC fighters were misclassified as contractors, the exact same legal argument could be applied to WWE's performers. For the newly formed TKO Holdings, this wasn't a public relations problem. It was an existential crisis. While Endeavor held daily crisis meetings in Beverly Hills, Ngannou was already steps ahead. His team launched FighterJustice.com, a website publishing the redacted contract clauses at the heart of the case. It garnered over 500,000 visits in hours, revealing shocking terms, such as a clause allowing the UFC to use a fighter's likeness in perpetuity without additional compensation. In plain English, even after a fighter left the promotion, the UFC could use their image, voice, and highlights forever, without paying another dime. Then came the poetic irony. The very investors Dana White had often mocked, the Saudis, began to circle. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, having already reshaped sports with LIV golf and heavyweight boxing, reportedly approached Ngannou's team about funding an athlete equity reform initiative. According to the Financial Times, the plan is to create a new MMA promotion where the fighters themselves own a stake in the organization. If this comes to pass, the UFC may soon face its first legitimate, well-funded global rival since the days of Pride. A rival built on the very principles of fairness that Francis Ngannou is fighting for. Throughout the storm, Francis Ngannou remained the picture of composure. Appearing on French television with a calm smile, he stated, "They said I couldn't make money without them. I made $40 million. Now, they will have to pay even more to stop me." This wasn't arrogance. It was a prophecy in motion. Insiders claim TKO Holdings quietly offered him a staggering $70 million settlement to drop the lawsuit and sign a non-disclosure agreement. Francis refused. His lawyer, Samuel Parker, declared, "This isn't about money anymore. It's about fixing the sport." The court filings now demand 3 fundamental changes. Revenue transparency, forcing the UFC to open its books. Independent classification reform, granting fighters basic employment protections. Restoration of sponsorship rights, allowing athletes to earn freely outside the octagon. To corporate America, this sounds radical. To every fighter who has ever had to beg for a payday, it sounds like freedom. But the most explosive revelation came not from a lawyer, but from 40 terabytes of internal data, emails, payment logs, and contracts that the court forced TKO to surrender. Within this digital mountain, investigators uncovered a chilling document labeled Operational Loyalty Incentives. It allegedly detailed secret cash bonuses paid to fighters who publicly defended UFC management during controversies. In essence, it was hush money disguised as loyalty rewards. If authenticated, this moves beyond unethical behavior into potential criminal territory. Another memo suggested certain fighters were paid through shadowy third-party entities to bypass athletic commission oversight. These same entities were allegedly later used to fund executive luxury retreats. The optics were damning. While fighters bled for $12,000 checks, executives were sipping champagne in Monaco. The corporate fallout was immediate. Sponsor crypto. Com suspended marketing campaigns. ESPN adjusted its coverage to include the lawsuit. BT Sport in the UK aired a segment titled, "Did Francis Ngannou just change MMA forever?" The question no longer seemed exaggerated. Behind closed doors, the TKO board reportedly considered firing Dana White to save shareholder value. But Endeavor CEO Ari Emanuel allegedly shut down the discussion, arguing, "You don't cut the face of the brand in a firestorm. You hide him behind the flames." Meanwhile, Ngannou kept winning the court of public opinion. Fans dubbed him the Muhammad Ali of MMA. Promoters like Eddie Hearn applauded his courage, stating, "He's doing what no one else had the balls to do, take on the system that feeds on them." When the Nevada Superior Court finally scheduled its first hearing, Francis Ngannou arrived not with an entourage, but with a quiet, unwavering confidence. He wore a simple black suit and offered a calm nod to the cameras, a man who had already won something bigger than a title. Because win or lose in court, the UFC can't unring this bell. The lawsuit has already forced regulators, investors, and fighters to question the very foundation the sport was built upon. The silence has been shattered forever. For 2 decades, Dana White built an empire on a single powerful idea: that fighters needed the UFC to survive. That without the octagon, they were nothing. Francis Ngannou proved the exact opposite. He left. He got rich. He maintained his respect. And then, he returned with a stack of receipts. The ripple effects are now turning into seismic waves. According to insiders, the U.S. Department of Labor has opened a preliminary review into athlete classification across combat sports. In government terms, that's a clear warning: we're watching. If this escalates into a full-blown investigation, TKO Holdings won't just be facing fines. It could be forced to reclassify its entire roster of over 600 fighters as bona fide employees. The implications are staggering: decades of back pay, health benefits, retirement plans, and total financial transparency. By late summer, whispers emerged that the UFC was preparing a final, desperate counteroffer, a 9-figure settlement to make the lawsuit disappear. Once again, Francis Ngannou refused. His reasoning was devastatingly simple: you can buy silence, but you cannot buy the truth. And that is where this story truly lands. Not with a knockout punch, but with a permanent, irreversible shift in the landscape of combat sports. For the first time, fighters are uniting. For the first time, fans are seeing behind the corporate curtain. And for the first time, the UFC's most formidable opponent isn't a man in 4-ounce gloves. It's accountability. As the September trial looms, one phrase echoes across social media, in gyms, and in every locker room where fighters tape their wrists and dream of glory. It's a raw, unfiltered demand that has become a global movement. Give me my fucking money. It's no longer just Francis Ngannou's line. It is the battle cry for a generation, and no amount of corporate power, promotion, or press spin can stop it. If you found the story of one man taking on a billion-dollar system compelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with your thoughts below, and check out our other videos for more deep dives into the stories shaping the world of sports.